Okay, so here we are with chapter 14 of Great Expectations. And the funny thing about this, guys, is I did it last week and now I'm repeating it. And I think this is the test of tenacity. I had issues with my mic, the audio didn't record. And so, am I going to sit here and write 3,000 words that I wrote last week? Again, word for word. And I think these are the moments when it's possible to lose momentum and say, okay, no one in the world is making me do this project. It is voluntary. But it is in these moments that I think you have to double down and, okay, maybe there's some value that I get by retyping the same chapter. So chapter 14 and a large part of chapter 15 is what I did. And that's it. Just got to redo it. So luckily chapter 14 is short and then there's a substantial bit of chapter 15. But I feel like my house setup, we shifted. I'm in a new apartment. I feel like it's decent. I think the audio hopefully is okay. Gonna get started now. I think I need some background. I think I need like a background image. I don't know, I have to figure out what to put there. Okay, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. It is a most miserable thing to feel ashamed of home. There may be black ingratitude in the thing, and the punishment may be retributive and well deserved. That's a word you don't hear often, retributive. But that it is a miserable thing, I can testify. Home had never been a very pleasant place to me because of my sister's temper. But Joe had sanctified it. And I had believed in it. I had believed in the best parlor as a most elegant saloon. I had believed in the front door as a mysterious portal of the temple of state, whose solemn opening was attended with triple T, come on Raghav, attended with a sacrifice of roast fowls. I had believed in the kitchen as a chaste, though not magnificent apartment. I had believed in the forge as the glowing road to manhood and independence. I love that, glowing road. Beautiful phrase. Within a single year, all this was changed. Just double checking the audio. I think everything is clear, so I'm grateful for that. That was a real issue last week. I did the whole video, but my mic, during my travel, basically the mic cord got damaged, and so it didn't, the streaming system wasn't picking up my audio, so that really sucked. But it sounds like now it's working, and now we're back on course and just need to look forward. Now it was all coarse and common, and I would not have had Miss Havisham and Estella see it on any account. And this is the point, right? Basically, chapters 1 through 13, Pip has, like Alice through the rabbit hole or like Dorothy leaving Kansas, Pip has seen another world. He has seen the world of upper class living as embodied by Estella and Miss Havisham, and Estella's derision towards him has made a mark on him. And returning home, things feel different. They feel stale, and he's ashamed of that, but I think it's something we all know. You know, once you've tasted of a more glamorous, larger life, it's easy to be seduced by it. So it's a very understandable thing for a young person to go through. So this is more of a reflective chapter after the action-packed previous chapter where, you know, Pip was made into Joe's apprentice. Everyone is celebrating. Miss Havisham gives him a big payout, £25, but Pip is miserable because he knows it's the end of an exciting chapter when he would go and see Estella in that beautiful, if crumbling and weird Gothic home. But now he's back to the quotidian, the ordinary. So with that, let's keep on going in this reflective chapter. How much of my ungracious condition of mind may have been my own fault? How much Miss Havisham's? How much my sister's is now of no moment to me or to anyone. The change was made in me. The thing was done, well or ill done, excusably or inexcusably. It was done. I love this paragraph because I think writers are good observers of the world, but they're also good observers not just of sensory detail and the external world. They are good observers, in theory, of the inner world. And here, I think, Pip, this paragraph does such a nice job. When something very deep has changed within us, the who, what, why, the blame assignation is trivial, it's pointless. And that's what this paragraph captures, that something so big has happened that the how of how it happened is incidental and unimportant now. He is changed. And so much of writing novels is getting characters to change. So the fact that we have had in 14 chapters such a big change is credit to Dickens, of course. Once it had seemed to me that when I should at last roll up my shirt sleeves and go into the forge, Joe's prentice, I should be distinguished and happy. Now the reality was in my hold. I only felt that I was dusty with the dust of small coal. That's a good sensory detail, just covered in the small coal dust. And that I had a weight upon my daily remembrance, to which the anvil was a feather. I think this is a very skilled writing where you have a double metaphor, right? You have a metaphor and a sensory detail, and the metaphor is drawing on the language of the world, right? Like, so the forge and the metaphor has a heavy anvil. His memory is laying on him, like something is weighing on him, and simultaneously that is paired with a very good sensory detail of being covered in dust. So I think if you can do the cerebral and the terrestrial in a single sentence, they kind of adhere together So I really like this type of, it's a good trick for when you want to use a metaphor to pair it with the sensory detail. There have been occasions in my later life, I suppose in most lives, when I have felt for a time as if a thick curtain had fallen on all its interest and romance to shut me out from anything save dull endurance anymore. Never has that curtain dropped so heavy and blank as when my life lay stretched out straight before me through the newly entered road of apprenticeship to Joe. I think many of us have probably been there when this thick curtain falls and life just seems so flat. So again, Dickens is such a good observer of our inner worlds. I remember that at a later period of my time, I used to stand about the churchyard on Sunday evenings when night was falling, comparing my own perspective with the windy marsh view and making out some likeness between them by thinking how flat and low both were, and how on both there came an unknown way and a dark mist, and then the sea. I was quite as dejected on the first working day of my apprenticeship as in that after time. But I am glad to know that I never breathed a murmur to Joe while my indentures lasted. It is about the only thing I am glad to know of myself in that connection. And again, we continue to like Pip because he does care about other people's emotions. For though it includes what I proceed to add, all the merit of what I proceed to add was Joe's. It was not because I was faithful, but because Joe was faithful, that I never ran away and went for a soldier or a sailor. It was not because I had a strong sense of the virtue of industry, but because Joe had a strong sense of the virtue of industry, that I worked with tolerable zeal against the grain. It is not possible to know how far the influence of any amiable, honest-hearted, duty-doing man flies out into the world. But it is very possible to know how it has touched one's self in going by. So this is such a good line. It's almost like it's a line that if someone said at your funeral, you would be touched. Of course, you wouldn't be there to hear it, but I love it. It is not possible to know how far the influence of any amiable, honest-hearted, duty-doing man flies out into the world, but it is very possible to know how it has touched oneself in going by. And I'm sure many of us have been touched by some honest, duty-doing man. I will say that the first 14 chapters of this book have presented at a time when there are all sorts of cultural conversations about masculinity. They have presented a really wonderful male role model in Joe, who is such a good influence on Pip. And here Pip gives so much credit to him. And we have seen it played out over the 14 chapters that Joe is pretty much as pure of heart and really good at modeling good behavior, and so he does deserve all this praise. And I know right well that any good that intermixed itself with my apprenticeship came of plain, contented Joe, and not of restlessly aspiring, discontented me. So it's a summary paragraph, but the emotional content, you can still do characterization through contrast. So even in summary, you can still do a lot of technical things. What I wanted, who can say? How can I say? When I never knew. What I dreaded was that in some unlucky hour, I, being at my grimiest and commonest, should lift up my eyes and see Estella looking in at one of the wooden windows of the forge. I was haunted by the fear that she would, sooner or later, find me out with a black face and hands, doing the coarsest part of my work, and would exult over me and despise me. Often, after dark, when I was pulling the bellows for Joe, and we were singing Old Clem, and when the thought how we used to sing it at Miss Havisham's would seem to show me Estella's face in the fire, with her pretty hair fluttering in the wind and her eyes scorning me. I read a book while I was at this residency in California it's called What We See When We Read by Peter Mandelsund, who I believe is a very well-known book cover designer in New York, I think for Knopf. Anyway, one of the things he writes is, as readers, we don't actually get often from the masters, we don't always get tons of precise visual details, and yet in our heads we do conjure up pictures of iconic characters. And one thing that I see Dickens doing is really tethering certain words to certain characters. So Estella, we always hear she's pretty. Now, pretty doesn't actually give you a picture. It just gives you whatever you graft onto pretty, and it's quite vague. But less vague is the word scorn. It's a precise word. However, it doesn't come with any visual details. But eyes scorning me, we know the feeling of scornful eyes. So even though in our head we may each be creating our own pretty Estella, the impact, the emotional impact, we are, Dickens has control over that. So he just tethers scorn, disdain, despise to Estella over and over and over again, and it has a cumulative effect. I think novice writers or amateur writers or student writers, or basically people who aren't Dickens, we all underestimate the cumulative effects. We think, oh, I've said something, the reader will retain it. That's true. Readers do retain a lot. But readers, no one can resist a cumulative effect. It takes an emotional toll in some respects. It does some emotional work, accumulation, that a single mention doesn't do. So I know I'm repeating myself, probably not in as skilled way as Dickens does, but I hope I've made my point. Often, at such a time, I would look towards those panels of black night in the wall, which the wooden windows then were, and would fancy that I saw her just drawing her face away, and would believe that she had come at last. So basically, Estella has completely colonized Pip's mind. She has filled him with shame about being coarse and common, and she's just in there haunting him. After that, when we went in to supper, the place and the meal would have a more homely look than ever, and I would feel ashamed of home, feel more ashamed of home than ever in my own ungracious breast. That's it. That's the very short chapter 14. So I'm going to keep pushing into chapter 15 because I'm feeling light and motivated and we have time. It's only 23 minutes in. As I was getting too big for Mr. Wopsle's great aunt's room, my education under that preposterous female terminated. Not, however, until Biddy had imparted to me everything she knew. From the little catalogue of prices to a comic song she had once bought for a halfpenny. Imagine today buying some content. These days we just assume we'll get it for free on the internet. Speaking of which, consider joining on Patreon or on the other things I have posted. Although the only coherent part of the latter piece of literature were the opening lines. When I went to Lunnon town, sirs, presumably London, to rull, lurull, wasn't I done very brown, sirs? Tural, lural, tural, lural. What on earth does any of that mean? Still, in my desire to be wiser, I got this composition by heart, with the utmost gravity. And that's so true, right? When you don't know what's important, you just learn everything. Or nor do I recollect that I questioned its merit, except that I thought, as I still do, the amount of tural somewhat in excess of the poetry. In my hunger for information, I made proposals to Mr. Wopsle to bestow some intellectual crumbs upon me, with which he kindly complied. As it turned out, however, that he only wanted me for a dramatic lay figure to be contradicted and embraced and wept over and bullied and clutched and stabbed and knocked about in a variety of ways. I do think one thing I've learned from Dickens, and one thing I will take away, is the strong the listing of strong verbs in sequence can do a lot of summarizing work. So you can summarize a large chunk of time through a long list of strong verbs. I think that's a very useful technique. I soon declined that course of instruction, though not until Mr. Wopsle, in his poetic fury, had severely mauled me. Whatever I acquired, I tried to impart to Joe. This statement sounds so well that I cannot, in my conscience, let it pass unexamined, unexplained. I wanted to make Joe less ignorant and common, that he might be worthier of my society and less open to Estella's reproach. The old battery out on the marshes was our place of study, and a broken slate and a short piece of slate pencil were our educational implements, to which Joe always added a pipe of tobacco. I never knew Joe to remember anything from one Sunday to another, or to acquire under my tuition. I don't know if this is tuition or tuition. In India we say tuition. In America they say tuition. I don't know what's right. Any piece of information, whatever. Yet, he would smoke his pipe at the Battery with a far more sagacious air than anywhere else. Even with a learned air, as if he considered himself to be advancing immensely. Dear fellow, I hope he did. It was pleasant and quiet out there with the sails on the river passing beyond the earthwork. And sometimes, when the tide was low, looking as if they belonged to sunken ships that were still sailing on at the bottom of the water. Whenever I watched the vessels standing out to sea with their white sails spread, I somehow thought of Miss Havisham and Estella. And whenever the light struck aslant, afar off, upon a cloud or sail or green hillside or waterline, it was just the same. Miss Havisham and Estella, and the strange house, and the strange life appeared to have something to do with everything that was picturesque. I mean, when something is impinging on your mind, you kind of see it everywhere. One Sunday when Joe, so here we're coming out of chapter 14 was entirely summary. Most of chapter 15 has been summary. Finally, we're emerging into a scene. One Sunday when Joe, greatly enjoying his pipe, had so plumed himself on being most awful dull that I had given him up for the day, I lay on the earthwork for some time with my chin on my hand, descrying traces of Miss Havisham and Estella all over the prospect, in the sky and in the water, until at last I resolved to mention a thought concerning them that had been much in my mind, in my head. Joe, said I, don't you think I ought to make Miss Havisham a visit? Well, Pip, returned Joe, slowly considering. What for? What for, Joe? What is any visit made for? There's some visits, perhaps, said Joe. As forever remains open to the question, Pip. But in regard to visiting Miss Havisham, she might think you wanted something, expected something of her. Don't you think I might say that I did not, Joe? You might, old chap, said Joe. And she might credit it. Similarly, she mightn't. Joe is a very wise man. Joe felt, as I did, that he had made a point there, and he pulled hard at his pipe to keep himself from weakening it by repetition. That's another thing. I mean, if you recall, previously Dickens gave Joe a poker, and he kept between his statements he would poke the fire. Here Dickens has given him a pipe. It's such a good idea to give people objects for the duration of scenes, and then they can gesticulate and gesture with them. You see, Pip, Joe pursued, as soon as he was past that danger, Miss Havisham done the handsome thing by you. When Miss Havisham done the handsome thing by you, she called me back to say to me, as that were all. If you recall, after their interaction, Miss Havisham called Joe back in for a private audience with her. Yes, Joe, I heard her. All, Joe repeated, very emphatically. Yes, Joe, I tell you, I heard her. Which, I mean to say, Pip, it might be that her meaning were, make a end on it. As you was, me to the north, and you to the south. Keep in sunders. So now he's belaboring the point with idiom. But it is a well-made point. I had thought of that too. Of course you have, Pip, you're very tactful. And it was very far from comforting to me to find that he had thought of it, for it seemed to render it more probable. Isn't that the case? Again, Dickens is good at capturing these universal feelings. You feel some sort of way, you wish it weren't true, someone else says it, and that makes it more probable. But Joe, yes, old chap? Here am I, getting on in the first year of my time, and since the day of my being bound, I have never thanked Miss Havisham, or asked after her, or shown that I remember her. That's true, Pip. And unless you was to turn her out a set of shoes, all four round, and which, I mean to say, as even a set of shoes, all four round, might not be acceptable as a present in a total vacancy of hooves. I don't mean that sort of remembrance, Joe. I don't mean a present. But Joe had got the idea of a present in his head and must harp upon it. Or even, said he, if you was helped to knocking her up, a new chain for the front door, or say a gross or two of shark-headed screws for general use. Sometimes I don't, we live without thinking. Nowadays, screws are all machine manufactured. You don't even think about how at one point everything was handmade. It's quite something. Even screws. Or some light fancy article, such as a toasting fork when she took her muffins, or a gridiron when she took a sprat, or such like. I don't mean any present at all, Joe, I interposed. Well, said Joe, still harping on it, as though I had particularly pressed it. If I was yourself, Pip, I wouldn't. No, I would not. For what's a door chain when she's got one always up? And shark headers is open to misrepresentations. What possibly could they misrepresent, I wonder? And if it was a toasting fork, you'd go into brass and do yourself no credit. It's always a pleasure when someone writes with knowledge about a specific domain, and it's fun to see this sort of woven into a comedic moment. And the uncommonest workman can't show himself uncommon in a gridiron. For a gridiron is a gridiron, said Joe steadfastly impressing it upon me, as if he were endeavoring to rouse me from a fixed delusion. And you may aim at what you like. You may aim at what you like. But a gridiron, it will come out. Either by your leave or again your leave. And you can't help yourself. I wonder what he means by gridiron specifically. So a hand-forged metal cooking grate. So no matter which way you make it, it just is the same. So there's no art. You can't really express yourself with it, which is what I thought. It's just a metal grate. It's just lines, and it's funny to see him sort of lose himself in this digression. "My dear Joe," I cried in desperation, taking hold of his coat. "Don't go on in that way. I never thought of making Miss Havisham any present." "No, Pip," Joe assented, as if he had been contending for that. He is so good-natured and amiable, he cannot help but keep agreeing all along. And what I say to you is, you are right, Pip. What a good-natured man Joe is. "Yes, Joe. But what I wanted to say was that as we are rather slack just now, if you would give me a half holiday tomorrow, I think I should go uptown and make a call on Miss Est Havisham." So, slip of the tongue from our little Pip, and the truth comes out. He wants to see Estella. "Which her name," said Joe gravely, "ain't Estavisham, Pip, unless she have been rechristened." He has a good deadpan delivery, doesn't he, Joe? "I know, Joe, I know. It was a slip of mine. What do you think of it, Joe?" In brief, Joe thought that if I thought well of it, he thought well of it. But he was particular in stipulating that if I were not received with cordiality, or if I were not encouraged to repeat my visit as a visit which had no ulterior object, but was simply one of gratitude for a favor received, then this experimental trip should have no successor. By these conditions, I promised to abide. Joe is a very wise man. But I want to show you here just something really good that Dickens has done that we can all learn for how to construct our middles. I think we have an enigma now that is set up. How will Pip be received by Miss Havisham and Estella? Right? We know now he's going to make a trip when he gets this half holiday. So now we'll see for the remainder of chapter 15, there's an enigma activated. What you want to do in the middle of a story is introduce, Roland Barthes calls them snares, jammings, partial answers, suspended answers, equivocations. These are delays that delay the resolution of an enigma, and also they simultaneously delay and bring us towards the resolution. So we are going to see a really good jamming or snare. It doesn't matter how you understand it. It doesn't matter precisely what the definition is. What matters is that you understand that you want to delay resolution of enigma. So here we're going to see a really good jamming that Dickens throws into this chapter, and it requires this character who we're about to meet. Okay, let me just have some. I don't know if you guys know, it's 93 degrees Fahrenheit this week in Chicago. Of course, it's evening time. It's not quite that hot. So I'm just having water, staying hydrated, and let's keep going with chapter 15. Now, Joe kept a journeyman at weekly wages whose name was Orlick. He pretended that his Christian name was Dolge, a clear impossibility. But he was a fellow of that obstinate disposition that I believe him to have been the prey of no delusion in this particular, but willfully to have imposed that name upon the village as an affront to its understanding. I don't fully understand this, but the idea is he's just a difficult guy. But yeah, it's worth probably unpacking this more. He pretends that they have. He pretended that his Christian name was Dolge, a clear impossibility. But he was a fellow of that obstinate disposition that I believe him to have been the prey of no delusion in this particular, but willfully to have imposed that name upon the village was an affront to its understanding. So he's just sort of a difficult person who willfully misrepresents, is how I understand that. He was a broad-shouldered, loose-limbed, swarthy fellow of great strength, never in a hurry and always slouching. He never even seemed to come to his work on purpose, but would slouch in as if by mere accident. And when he went to the Jolly Bargeman to eat his dinner, or went away at night, he would slouch out like Cain or the Wandering Jew, as if he had no idea where he was going and no intention of ever coming back. He lodged at a sluice keeper's out on the marshes, and on working days would come slouching from his hermitage, with his hands in his pockets and his dinner loosely tied in a bundle round his neck and dangling on his back. On Sundays, he mostly lay all day on the sluice gates, or stood against ricks and barns. He always slouched locomotively with his eyes on the ground. So it's an outstanding portrait, emotional as much as physical, of a really sort of vacant fellow. And when accosted or otherwise required to raise them, he looked up in a half resentful, half puzzled way, as though the only thought he ever had was that it was rather an odd and injurious fact that he should never be thinking. This morose journeyman had no liking for me. When I was very small and timid, he gave me to understand that the devil lived in a black corner of the forge, and that he knew the fiend very well. Also, that it was necessary to make up the fire once in 7 years with a live boy, and that I might consider myself fuel when I became Joe's prentice. Orlick was perhaps confirmed in some suspicion that I should displace him. Howbeit, he liked me still less. Not that he ever said anything, or did anything, openly importing hostility. I only noticed that he always beat his sparks in my direction, and that whenever I sang Old Clem, he came in out of time. So these are two exceptional details from within the world of the forge that show that Orlick and Pip are out of sync. Doge Orlick was at work and present next day when I reminded Joe of my half holiday. So also this is I think many of us, when we build a world, we think we need to show the reader all the different parts of the world early on. We've had 13 chapters thinking that Joe, Mrs. Joe, and Pip were always by themselves in this accommodation. But here we find out that there was a journeyman often there. But it's introduced late, and we just reconfigure our understanding and include it. So it just goes to show you don't need to paint a full picture of the world. You can introduce new elements at a later time. He said nothing at the moment, for he and Joe had just got a piece of hot iron between them, and I was at the bellows. But by and by he said, leaning on his hammer, "Now, master, sure you're not a-going to favor only one of us." If young Pip has a half holiday, do as much for old Orlick. I suppose he was about 25, but he usually spoke of himself as an ancient person. What a weirdo, Orlick. Why? What'll you do with the half holiday? If you get it, said Joe. What'll I do with it? What'll he do with it? I'll do as much with it as him. So it really is his animus with Pip that is stirring this up, said Orlick. As to Pip, he's going uptown, said Joe. Well then, as to old Orlick, he's a-going uptown. Retorted that worthy. Two can go uptown. 'Tain't only one what can go uptown. He is funny, I'll give him credit for that. Don't lose your temper, said Joe. Shall, if I like, growled Orlick. Some and their uptowning. He really is funny. Now, master, come. No favoring in this shop. Be a man. The master, refusing to entertain the subject until the journeyman was in a better temper, Orlick plunged at the furnace, drew out a red-hot bar, made at me with it, as if he were going to run it through my body. A forge is really a dangerous place to work with someone who doesn't like you. Whisked it round my head, laid it on the anvil, hammered it out as if it were I thought, and the sparks were my spurting blood, and finally said, when he had hammered himself hot and the iron cold, and he again leaned on his hammer. So it's a great long sentence with a metaphor in it. Two metaphors really. one of Pip being the red hot bar being hammered, and also Orlick hammering himself hot. So it's a really rich sentence. He again leaned on his hammer. Now, master. Are you all right now? Demanded Joe. I think you should say something, Joe, about him nearly hitting Pip. Ah, I am all right, said gruff old Orlick. Then, as in general, you stick to your work as well as most men, said Joe. Let it be a half holiday for all. My sister had been standing silent in the yard, within hearing. She really isn't escaping any of the accusations that Pip has been making about her character. Poor Mrs. Joe. She was a most unscrupulous spy and listener, and she instantly looked in at one of the windows. So now we see why this is a jamming or a snare. Pip wants to go to see Estella and Miss Havisham. He asks for a half holiday. That request for a half holiday triggers Orlick, which triggers Mrs. Joe. So we have this whole snare that's activated. But what it's really doing in the middle of the book is delaying the resolution of the enigma, extending the dramatic tension. What will happen when Pip turns up at Miss Havisham's house? So it's a much ado about nothing. Pip, as we know, he doesn't want to get embroiled in this. He's got bigger fish to fry. But we, the reader, and Pip, we need to go through this snare to get to the resolution of the enigma. Like you fool, said she to Joe, giving holidays to great idle hulkers like that. So for the record, she's the first one to use insulting language. Giving holidays to great idle hulkers like that. You are a rich man upon my life to waste wages in that way. I wish I was his master. You'd be everybody's master if you durst, retorted Orlick with an ill-favored grin. And Orlick clearly is a real, the technical term, as we say in America, is shit stirrer. Let her alone, said Joe. This is in parentheticals. I'd be a match for all noodles and all rogues, returned my sister, beginning to work herself into a mighty rage. And I couldn't be a match for the noodles without being a match for your master, who's the dunder-headed king of the noodles. Poor Joe. And I couldn't be a match for the rogues without being a match for you, who are the blackest looking, and the worst rogue between this and France now. You're a foul shrew, Mother Gargery. Which is interesting because she doesn't have any kids of her own. So I wonder if that's an insult or if that's just how someone is referred to. But it's an interesting choice of words. You're a foul shrew, growled the journeyman. If that makes a judge of rogues, you ought to be a good un. He has a vicious tongue, Orlick. Let her alone, will you? Again in parentheticals. So Joe is trying to intercede on behalf of his wife with Orlick. Let her alone, will you? Said Joe. He's trying to diffuse, de-escalate. De-escalate is the in vogue term. What did you say? Cried my sister, beginning to scream. What did you say? What did that fellow Orlick say to me, Pip? What did he call me, with my husband standing by? Poor Joe. No one needs a wife like this. Oh! 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 Each of these exclamations was a shriek, and I must remark of my sister what is equally true of all the violent women I have ever seen, that passion was no excuse for her, because it is undeniable that instead of lapsing into passion, she consciously and deliberately took extraordinary pains to force herself into it, and became, I'm sure people know people like this, who have temper problems, but they don't fall into their temper problems. Rather, they seem to work themselves up intentionally, for whatever reason. I'm not a psychotherapist and I shouldn't speculate. And became blindly furious by regular stages. What was the name he gave me? Before the base man who swore to defend me? Oh, hold me. Oh. So it's a comic scene, but there is an underlying tragedy, because I think many fights do escalate in precisely the manner that Dickens has shown. I can't even make the sound. Growled the journeyman. Just imagine a growl sound between his teeth. I'd hold you if you was my wife. I'd hold you under the pump and choke it out of you. So basically saying, if you were my wife, I would, violently get this, sort of control you through violence. And once again, for the third time, Joe tries to de-escalate things. I tell you, let her alone, said Joe. And the language has been different each time, getting, Let her alone, will you? I tell you, let her alone. So finally, he's like, he's sort of running his pace. At some point, you have to imagine Joe needs to put something behind those words. Oh, to hear him, cried my sister, with a clap of her hands and a scream together. Which was her next stage. It's depressing how well Pip knows her stages. To hear the names he's giving me, that Orlick, in my own house. Me, a married woman, with my husband standing by. Oh, here, my sister, after a fit of clappings and screamings, beat her hands upon her bosom and upon her knees, and threw her cap off and pulled her hair down, which were the last stages on her road to frenzy. Being by this time a perfect fury and a complete success, she made a dash at the door, which I had fortunately locked. So Pip, like Joe, is quite adept at managing these fools. So I'm going to probably write this paragraph and then read it. So there's just going to be some typing sounds for a bit. What could the wretched Joe do now, after his disregarded parenthetical interruptions, but stand up to his journeyman, and ask him what he meant by interfering betwixt himself and Mrs. Joe, and further whether he was man enough to come on? Old Orlick felt that the situation admitted of nothing less than coming on, and was on his defence straightway. So without so much as pulling off their singed and burnt aprons, they went at one another like two giants. But if any man in that neighborhood could stand up long against Joe, I never saw the man. Could stand up long. Could stand up long. I wonder if it's like a boxing enjambment or if it's just a typo. I never saw the man. Orlick, as if he had been of no more account than the pale young gentleman, was very soon among the coal dust. So this is interesting because the build-up has been very gradual, but then the climax is very quick, where Joe and Orlick fight and Joe beats Orlick. So it was interesting that Dickens took a lot of time with the build-up, but was very quick with the fight itself. Very soon among the coal dust, and in no hurry to come out of it. Then Joe unlocked the door and picked up my sister, who had dropped insensible at the window, but who had seen the fight first, I think, and who was carried into the house and laid down, and who was recommended to revive, and would do nothing but struggle and clench her hands in Joe's hair. Then came that singular calm and silence which succeed all uproars, and then, with the vague sensation which I have always connected with such a lull, namely, that it was Sunday and somebody was dead, I went upstairs to dress myself. It's a very, very interesting end to this section. It's not the end of the chapter, but it is where we are stopping for today. But again, like Dickens is so good at this precise capturing of a feeling. Here it's the feeling that comes after a physical fight. The singular calm and silence which succeed all uproars. And he sort of says it feels like the Sunday of a funeral, which also creates some like menace and foreboding before Pip heads off to see Havisham and Estella. So it's a really great chapter. Chapter 14 is summary, reflecting on the mood that comes over Pip now that he is an apprentice to Joe. And he's really sad. He's had a window into a life that was bigger and greater, as the title of the book, Great Expectations, would suggest. But he's back into a small world, the forge. And then he makes this move, right? He's going to visit Miss Havisham and Estella. We don't know how he's going to be received. But before we can see how this move plays out, there's an extended snare jamming through Orlick and Mrs. Joe. And we see that coarse, common, base, low class, all those things that he is afraid that Estella thinks of him. We see in Orlick and Mrs. Joe that he is mired in that world for the moment. How could he ever escape this world of coal dust? You know, is he going to end up like Joe, forever negotiating between people like Orlick and his wife? So we hope not, for his sake, and I'm sure Joe as well wants the best for Pip. But it's a very, very interesting scene and a very useful jamming snare to delay the resolution of the enigma. This is Orlick Among the Cinders. Again, these illustrations are not at all how I picture Joe or Pip, but they're here. And we have 7 pages left in chapter 15, which we'll do on Thursday, and perhaps even push into chapter 16. We'll see how I feel. But hopefully the audio is good for this one. I really enjoyed redoing it. I didn't like the idea of redoing, 2,600 words plus chapter 14. I was like, I wish I hadn't had those technical difficulties. But if the idea is rewriting word for word helps internalize these the finer points of craft, then redoing it again can only help, right? So it's a bit tedious, but I'm glad to have done it, and we're back on course. Next week is new material that I haven't done before, so it only took one course correcting week. Looks like my audio's in good shape. Take care, everyone. Have a good couple of days, and hope to see you Thursday. And if you're watching this far into the future, using it to go to sleep, or watching on 2x, I hope you enjoyed. That's it from me.